That's honestly my biggest advice. People ask me like, oh, how do you like newer jumpers? You know, and I still consider myself a newer jumper. I'm not, but I just consider myself the young kid there, you know. So it's always weird to get people ask advice, but somebody always looks up to somebody. You're always everybody, you know. And so people are like, oh, what's your advice to like have fun, or what's your advice to a newer jumper? Which is just a really broad question. Like, I don't know,
really
learn how to
question.
land a parachute, whatever. But to me, the real advice is like.
What's up, guys? This is Caylen with the Modern Day Sniper Podcast. Welcome back to another episode. And in this one, we are talking to a guest speaker who is a really good friend of mine. His name is V. Buck Prib, and he is a skydiver out of Chelan, Washington, which is my home drop zone. And I met V about 8 years ago when I first started skydiving, and he started his journey in becoming a competitive canopy pilot. We wanted to bring you guys some different content for this episode and bring somebody that is outside the world of shooting, but is an active, very high level competitor to get a little bit of a view into what goes on in his mind when he's competing at that high level. Currently, V is 4th in the world as a canopy pilot, which is awesome. It's been so cool to see him on his journey of progression and how he trains and how he stays focused to meet his goals. I am super stoked to have been able to sit down and chat with him. I learned a lot, and I hope you guys learn a lot from the episode too. So make sure that you let us know if this is something that you like, because we can bring V back on and go a little bit deeper into all of the subjects that we discussed. But for the interim, have a listen to the episode. Let us know what you think, and make sure that you leave a comment. So thanks a lot, guys. We appreciate all of you. Enjoy the show.
Wow. So it's been a while since I've seen you.
For sure, man.
When was the last time we hung out? Well, early last summer, wasn't it?
Would have been, because you weren't out at Skyfest, were you? No, it was early last summer, because you came out early, and then you had family emergency you had to leave, so it wasn't even like a full weekend. Yeah. Because you were out for a full weekend, and then you like left the trailer at the place or something.
Yep. Yep. And then, I was training. I trained last summer. There's a few times that I was at the drop zone where you were going, you were out, like you were either going, you were competing or doing something. But I jumped for like, I don't know, I logged like 20 something skydives the first part of the summer, getting ready to go do that demo for
sure.
Stone
That's
Glacier.
right. I remember that. I do remember that.
So,
yeah, because you came out and did accuracy stuff on your big canopy.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that now.
Mm-hmm. Which is, I mean, it's fun. I think it's fun.
All parachutes are fun, man. You know?
All parachutes are fun. Yeah.
You know, I'm like a super swoop knob, you know, or swoop snob. Sorry. I guess whatever.
I'm a fine rifle kind of.
Yeah, exactly. But so I'm always like, oh, I want to swoop, or I want to do this, so I only want to do this one thing. But then I'll fly a big parachute, and sure, it's not as fun. And it's not really what I want to do. But if you don't go into it with that mindset, I have a blast. Like, messing around, you're still flying, and you can still learn stuff that apply. It might be very subtle, but you're still doing it is better than not doing it. So.
Yeah. Well, you took one of the Modern Day Sniper goat.
Did their inaugural jump? Yeah, for sure.
That was cool.
I did.
That was fun. Doing that demo in Bozeman was fun. That was like it was the way that the landing profile is like it's a major through. It's at Four Corners in Bozeman, so or just up the road from Four Corners. So it's a major intersection that's kind of like south. I think it's southeast Bozeman, but you're flying right next to the road, and so like you can hear people honking and stuff, and it's pretty fun. Yeah, and the crowd really enjoys it there, and we're just like supporting Stone Glacier. They give us so much support. It's like
that's awesome.
Yeah, and the crowd enjoys it and stuff. So
doing anything with a crowd where you can hear cheering, it just really does make everything better.
Sure.
Even if you mess up, I think it actually does make things better. Like, you know, we're doing freestyle at the World Cup, and people are cheering.
That's awesome.
It's just so much fun to be able to hear people, or if you have a good run, to have a crowd there.
Yeah,
that's just the coolest thing.
Yeah, I've never done anything like that other than doing demos with skydiving. You know, the couple that we did up at Chelan, and then I got really graciously invited to do one with CPS at SHOT Show for.
We talked about that, yeah, for sure.
That was pretty intense because there was a lot of eyeballs there, and like
games on.
Yeah,
too.
games on.
Yeah, it's not just performance. It's...
And I am literally like the Buddhist ass jumper on this team of gangsters that has tens of thousands of jumps, you know, and this is like no big deal, and I'm this new kid that's just I'm just fucking terrified.
Hey, what are the conditions? Where are you gonna go your pattern? Yeah.
Exactly. You were talking about earlier, like, hey man, what's your wind call?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna be like, well, I'm gonna part it right. Yup, he was right there. That's exactly what I need.
Definitely what I'm gonna do. I'm not gonna do anything differently. Yeah.
Exactly. But it's like I've been put into a couple of high consequence parachuting situations, and like as really relatively low jump numbers.
Sure, you did it super early.
And you know, I don't know if that's, you know, some people would look at that and be like, that's dangerous or that's unsafe. I was blessed to learn from some really good people in the sport.
You can't solely go off numbers. A lot of time, I mean, generally numbers and safety margins and rules it's kind of the lowest common denominator, right? Like, how do I write this rule? So a rule is, we write it so no matter what, if you follow this, the outcome's always going to be the same, or it's not going to be this. And that's not always the case. Or that's usually not the case for sometimes even the majority of the people, but that's how rules are. So a lot of the times numbers on skill allowing you to do something aren't always applied right. So for that case, you did have the skill, and I believe that nobody would have let you do that, and you wouldn't have been there if you weren't ready for it.
For sure. That's really high consequence. And, you know, it's just, you know, it's a lot of it's like a competitive mindset. You have to be focused and you just have to rely on the fact that I've been taught properly.
Yep.
Now it's my job to execute those skills under this particular set of circumstances. And it's always been so much fun because skydiving to me was not, I'm usually pretty good at whatever I do. And I know that sounds arrogant, but we were talking about this with somebody else, and it's just like, yeah, I can see something. Like if I see like this, you know, you teach me how to use this widget, or I see you use it, I can pretty much pick it up. Like that's how I learned how to weld. Yep. That's how I learned how to do. That's how I learned how to do a lot of things, right? But the things that I really had to work at to learn and to do well at a high level was flying airplanes. I really had to work at that, and skydiving.
For sure.
Like I have to work at those things because those two things, flying, I haven't flown in a long time, but skydiving is one of those things that like, I don't do it enough. Like
that's a huge part of it.
Yeah, I don't do it enough. And so, but like learning those foundational principles of body flight, like when I first learned how to skydive, my mentors on the military free fall side of the house, they said, no matter what you do, don't go try to free fly, you know, stay on your belly, learn how to do everything that you can on your belly with precision.
Yep.
And when you can do that confidently, then you can move into free fly, but not until then. And they told me stories. They're like, you know, we've had guys come through the military free fall course that it's very evident that as soon as they got their A license, they immediately went to free flying, and now they don't understand the basic principles of belly flight.
Sure, absolutely.
And they're having real big time struggles flying equipment and heavy, awkward loads and things like that. So I think I was, you know, really, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? I feel a lot of blessed. I'm very blessed. I can't even speak. I'm very blessed to have learned from,
for sure,
people like you. And I guess before we get too deep into this, who is V Buck Prib?
V Buck Prib is me. I finished off Caylen's license, getting his skydive rating. I'm a U.S. parachute team member. I'm a canopy pilot. So what that is a very small, very high performance parachute. You dive it straight at the ground, recover and fly through a course, sometimes touching the ground, you know, within 5 feet of the ground, doing 90 to 100 miles an hour. So super, super fast, super small margin for error. If you look up canopy piloting or swooping, as we colloquially call it, you'll kind of get a good idea for that. It's a little bit hard to describe. Imagine a high performance airplane with no propeller, so no propulsion other than gravity. So you can do things that induce speed going straight down, and then you use all that energy you created and you release that and fly through a course on the ground. So I'm on the U.S. parachute team. I was at the World Cup of Skydiving. I placed 4th, so currently ranked 4th in the world. And I will be still representing the U.S. team here in South Africa in September of next year, as well as a bunch of other meets.
Dude, congratulations to you, man.
Thank you, man.
I mean, it's been, so I first met you in summer of 2016. And I remember when I was making my choice, so I went to Florida. I learned how to skydive into land with Fred Williams at Complete Parachute Solutions. And I knew immediately, like, this is something that I was going to do for as long as my body would allow me to do it. It was just too much fun. And so when I was choosing my drop zone here in Washington, I knew that there was a couple of them. But Caylen was just the best pick because the coaches that I had were like, big drop zones are cool because you're going to be able to turn a lot of jumps and you're going to be able to do a lot more things. But there's just something to be said about, the feeling of a small drop zone. And that's what Skydive Caylen was. And so it was the closest to Yakima. And when I came up there, I'll never forget, man, when I came up and I didn't really know what to expect. And so all I knew that I wanted to skydive. And one of the things that struck me was when I first met you, you were in your early 20s, right?
Yeah, I was probably 22 or 23.
So young, but at the same time, like I remember when Todd introduced me to you as my instructor, as soon as I saw you, I was like, you had a mohawk back then?
Yeah, it might have even been a colored mohawk at that point. I think it was
it wasn't colored.
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't colored. It was tall though. And I looked at you and I was just like, stereotype instantly. That's the kid that all of my mentors warned me about. I'm like, fan-fucking-tastic. But I thought that right up until the point where you opened your mouth and you started talking and you started teaching. And it was very evident to me that you have an excellent vocabulary and you have a great way of handling yourself in front of students. And I'm a teacher. That's what I do for a living. And I think that even if I wasn't teaching people, how to shoot rifles, I'd probably be teaching them how to do something.
You usually always end up teaching somebody at the drop zone something. So you always end up, you have the knack for teaching. I can tell. You always end up teaching somebody.
I enjoy it, and but when I listen to you teach, and then we made a connection, and it was at that point in time that stereotype obviously just disappeared, went away. And, we've since become good friends, and I love jumping with you. I learn something from you every single time. And you are a master of your craft, which is why I really wanted to bring you on the Modern Day Sniper podcast.
For sure. Happy to be here.
Yes, you're very welcome. I think that there's a tremendous amount of parallels in our individual sports. And I've learned a lot from the skydiving world, and I've met some of the best people I've ever known in the skydiving world. And I've also done that in the shooting community as well. So really what I wanted to do is bring you here and give our listeners a different perspective, or hear a different perspective on what it means to be a high-level competitor.
For sure.
And you are competing at the highest level. You are 4th in the world.
Yep.
Right?
Yes, sir.
That's fucking impressive, dude.
It's a task for sure. Appreciate it. Thank you. It's been a long road, and I'm not done here. Like this isn't the goal I set out when I started doing this. Goals are always ever changing. That can be a whole nother topic of conversation, but this is definitely the road to get there. And you have an idea what you want to do, and you have an end goal, right? But the road, you don't know what that's going to be like till you're doing it. So it's been a lot of fun and a lot of work, but I enjoy putting the time in and putting the work in. Because you started
swooping, you said just kind of before I came to the drop zone, so in like early 2016.
Well, it's kind of it's a hard thing to say because like you don't just start learning this. You don't just all of a sudden like, oh, here's a small parachute and learn to do it. You have to learn the fundamentals, just like shooting. You know, to shoot a long range rifle, you probably could just show up and start learning how to do it, but you need to learn the fundamentals of what even is a firearm. How does it work?
Exactly.
What is this and how do I use this effectively and safely? Same thing happens with skydiving. So I had probably 50, 60 jumps. It was my first summer and I saw somebody swoop, and looking back, it was actually probably a pretty pitiful swoop. But at the time, I'm like, that's the coolest shit. I want to do that. And I talked to Todd, who was my mentor, and I'm like, how do I know you do that. How do I do that? Yeah. And so my swoop progression started at 50 jumps because I was told you need to learn how to land a parachute safely, which I was at that point. I was licensed, but you need to be able to land it anywhere, any day, any conditions. And then once you can do that, now we learn how to make the parachute fly better. You just need to be able to make the parachute fly at first. So that's the fundamentals, just like anything else. You need to learn the fundamentals before you can apply anything new.
It's exactly the same thing in shooting.
Absolutely. And so it's kind of weird because people think when you're swooping, you start, that's when you got the small parachute. And I say like 50 jumps roughly, because that's when I had the idea I want to do that. And I started, and as soon as I kind of have an idea, I'm usually pretty focused on what I want to do.
Right.
And so I was like, hey, I want to do that. And everything from then on was focused on that completely. So even if I wasn't doing something that was necessarily swoop related, I would always like, how can I apply this? How can I apply swooping to this? And how can I learn from this to do that? Because that is the total end goal.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, your progression starts like right there. And just like my skydiving mentors started me on that road, that was the same thing that you got. And we see that a lot with students that, we look at them and we're like, okay, they ask us, where should I start? Like, where should I be? And the best thing that we can get is somebody who has zero experience.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried to validate the training program, several times. Cassandra being a perfect example, right? So an individual has no understanding whatsoever other than that's a firearm.
Right.
No clue of how any of it works, right? Maybe the trigger, because it's the easiest.
Everyone knows how a trigger works, right? Yeah.
So, but being able to take her from, she did the intro class, and then a couple weeks later, just shy of a month, she went and shot a rifle match with us up in Colville. And she ended up shooting 44% of the winner's points. And I was the winner.
Yeah.
And so she was super elated, and it was beautiful to see because she just did what she was taught how to do.
There you go, for sure.
And so that's where we find the biggest success with our students is people who either don't know anything or are truly capable of just submitting to the process. That's the hardest part. Like if you have a dude that is or gal for that matter, there's a lot of females that are shooting now too. If they've got like preconceived notions, years and years of neural pathways that are wired in the wrong direction, right? It's like I tell the students, basically, it's like when we first start doing something, just like wiring your house, right? We want to really think through that wiring process and how we want all of those switches and lights and fixtures, because as soon as we, insulate sheetrock, mud, now we got problems.
It's a lot harder to get to.
Exactly. Sure. It's a lot harder to get to, right? So our neural pathways are exactly the same way. So if we build this massively myelinated neural pathway one direction, it takes a tremendous amount of focused effort to build another one that has even more, because it's not like you have to do that. You have to reprogram and rewire your brain. So learning things from the foundational principles is very important.
It's huge.
And so you rely on that in skydiving, and we rely on it in the same thing in the shooting world, because what we want is the execution of the fundamentals of marksmanship to come from the subconscious mind.
Exactly. I couldn't say that better. And to me, that's anything you want to do well.
Yeah.
Obviously, in the beginning, you need to focus on the fundamentals to do stuff. But once you get to a super high level, the fundamentals should be so there that you almost don't even need to. Like if somebody asks you about the fundamentals, you might actually have to think like, wait a second.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I do this or I do that. But because it's so ingrained in your head, I don't know.
Right.
Because that's just there's such a constant thing. I like to look at a lot of this stuff like a scientific study. Like if we're training, well, we only change one thing. In science, they change one thing, and they have all these constant things. So you don't change all these other things because you might get a great outcome, but you don't know how you got there.
Right.
And so it's the same kind of thing. You need to be constant.
Yep. Agreed. Yeah, and it's like it paid off. It's paid off dividends in everything, in the things that I have done. Like as an example, I got out of the Marine Corps and I came up here to Washington. I had no idea how to weld, none whatsoever. And through guidance and mentorship of a couple key people, I was able to learn how to weld. I was able not only learn how to like MIG, stick, TIG, both aluminum and stainless.
Sure.
And it was just like, okay, well, if this is how I got to do the thing, then I guess that's how you can do it.
And some things definitely are easier. So like there's all types of ways to learn. Everybody learns differently. I'm a very visual learner. I'm similar to you. If I see it done, I know I can see that done now. So for skydiving, it's kind of tricky because it's a very feel thing. Mm-hmm. And so it's actually, that's why a lot of people can really, really struggle at learning it. Because one, maybe sometimes their instructors aren't the best or not teaching to them. They might be a great instructor, but maybe they don't teach the right way they learn.
Sure.
But then at the same time, it's different ways to learn. So like my actual job as a tree worker, I can see something done. I can see something do something a different way. And I'm like, oh, I know, I just learned a new way to do that. Mm-hmm. And so some jobs and some tasks are really easy to learn that way. Welding is also one of those.
Yep.
Where, I've seen that done, so I know how to do that.
Yep.
But not everybody learns that way. And that can be really tricky when you're learning, because if you don't know how you learn, and you can be like, man, I'm really struggling. I'm getting coaching from this guy who's the best, and I don't feel like I'm learning.
Yeah, it could be just that. It's that barrier, right?
For sure. And you might learn from this some guy who's good, but just some schmo at the range or wherever, and you're like, oh, that just clicked all of a sudden. That guy's not even that good. Well, because that person knew how to explain it or teach it.
Yep.
You were able to grasp it. Exactly.
Done. Yeah, for sure. And that was what when I first started communicating with you, I was just like, yeah, because I related to you because I was in your shoes when I was teaching people when I was that age. And at, a pretty freaking high level. We were at that age, I was responsible for producing Marine Corps snipers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, whoa, I look back, I'm 44 years old now. I look back on that and I'm just like, holy shit. It's a lot of responsibility on a 22-year-old.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I think, that we were just talking about visualization earlier and something just kind of came to mind and we've kind of touched on it a little bit. And like how I'm usually really good. Things come to me very easily, right? Like we were just talking about, like the things that we're flying, piloting airplanes, and skydiving. But everything else was like really easy to learn, especially in the military side of the house.
Yep.
It didn't matter what I did. Like I was never a machine gunner. All right, so I was never a machine gunner. So, but I had read about machine guns.
Yep.
I had read so many books when I was a kid. I was just like this fiend for that kind of information. I read both fiction and nonfiction. Mm-hmm. So I could literally visualize myself executing these tasks. Like that was my goal. That was my vision. That was my dream.
For sure.
So I could see myself as a young boy. I could visualize myself doing that when I got older, right? Going older. So that when I did have the opportunity to do that task, it felt like it was just like, oh, I've done this before. In my mind, I had done it before. Sure. And so it was like, bam, okay, you want me to, disassemble and reassemble a Browning M250 cal machine gun? Sure. Okay. I need to see it maybe once.
Right.
you know, and then it's like, okay, I got it.
For sure.
And I think that's, you know, in large part because like the visualization is very important, but I think you have some great points in visualization in the sense that it just doesn't work for you.
Well, there's also levels to it. So you have to look at like what's the outcome, right? Or what's going to happen if that visualization is a little bit off. Yeah, so like in your analogy of taking apart AM2, okay, well, what happens if it's a little bit different? Oh, well, I'm going to look around and be like, actually, there's the little things there. And and the grand outcome doesn't make any difference. But if your visualization is in, I'm at the biggest competition of my life and I'm winning if I make this, what I'm about to do, and let's say you visualize, a little bit wrong. Well, that little bit wrong at a high level is a total difference.
Sure.
And so now you're adapting to something that hasn't happened and you're training for something that could happen like that. But when it doesn't happen like that, you're actually training, just like you put the wiring in wrong, for something else that hasn't happened. So now at a split second, and depends on what you're doing, for swooping, it's pretty quick. Yep. We have to undo all this wiring, redo all the wiring, do it right.
In real time.
And and it sounds small because you're like, well, maybe I visualize rolling out here versus rolling out there. Sounds pretty small. But then when you roll out over here, holy shit. Or I visualize this shot hitting center or whatever. I'm not a marksman like you guys. So we're going to have to work with that.
No, you're not wrong.
The idea. So then I visualize this stage and all of a sudden, like, I messed up the first stage. Now what do I do? Right. Yeah. Well, I visualize for something that, so the margin, you have to look at the outcome of like, okay, is the margin, I just maybe fumble for a second, or maybe I look at what's going to happen if it's not right, or if that visualization doesn't work for you. In general, I do visualize on the grand scheme. As you were talking about, like learning how to do something, absolutely. I'll see it, I'll visualize through it. But when I think of visualization, I see, like in a competition or in training, like visualize, I do this, I do my turn, I do that. I don't do that because that to me is detrimental, because the human aspect is very hard to make everything perfect.
I've actually seen you do that. I've seen you, obviously I've ridden the plane up to altitude many, many times with you, and like your demeanor is always very consistent. You don't have, sometimes, you know, you can see with different people where it's like, okay, we got work face on.
Yeah.
Or that we've got, you know, fun face on. You're really even keeled in that realm. And so when you're preparing to do that, I have seen you in the airplane do a visualization, but is that something that you've since abandoned?
You've known me long enough, you've probably seen me go through stages. That was the stage where I'm like this, I had learned about it, I read about it, it's like the psychology behind it makes sense.
Sure.
I'm gonna do this.
Well, you're trying something to see if it works.
All the people that are really good do this. Yeah. So that's that equation. I'm gonna do their equation, and that'll make me good. That'll make me as good as them. It doesn't work that way. It didn't work for me. Now I've learned to be like, you know what? Stop. Like sometimes people think I have Tourette's or people, I don't know if they actually think I have Tourette's, but I'll be like in the plane because it usually, like, you might not be the first person out of the plane. So you might take off, you'll see the conditions, and then you might be the last pass and the last person out. So maybe you'll be up in the plane for 15 minutes. So that's basically 15 minutes. You can't look at the conditions.
Right.
If you completely change it, you can look out at a windsock. That's pretty much it. So you can't really do much. And I'll be out there and I'll feel myself slipping into like over focus, over visualize. This is important. And I'll have to tell myself like, stop. Like I'll literally shake my head and be like, stop.
Right.
We're not doing this. Because when I focused and over visualized on stuff, I found it was detrimental to my performance.
Yeah, I can totally see that because you can overanalyze things,
like
paralysis by analysis.
Try to walk while explaining how to walk.
Okay, yeah, totally. I can
explain how to breathe.
Yeah, how to breathe.
Yeah, what do? I guess I take my, and as you're explaining it, I'm like, I actually have to like breathe. What we've been breathing our whole lives. It's the same type of thing. Yeah. So there's a balance. You can't just create one cut and dry like thing that drays for success.
That's a totally fair thing to say.
In a certain place it might work well, and in other places it might not.
Have you ever heard of the 4 levels of consciousness when it comes to these?
Or maybe I have, but enlighten me because it doesn't sound familiar.
Layer 1 would be unconscious incompetence, which would be the equivalent of you don't know what you don't know, right? So that's like the baseline, right? Incompetence is, like, a lot of people look at it as a derogatory term. It's literally just a word to describe the fact that you're uneducated in an area. And then unconscious means I'm not aware, right? Then the next layer above that is conscious incompetence, which means I've learned what I don't know, right? And then the next layer above that is conscious competence. Means I'm competent in executing this task, but I have to use conscious thought to do it.
For sure.
And then obviously the level that we want to get to is unconscious competence. So we're pulling things from the subconscious. Now, one of the books that we've been discussing quite a bit in the shooting community as of late, I was first introduced to it by my friend Mike Lilly. I want to say several years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and I was never really focused on being a good competitor at that point in time. I've never really taken a pointed focus at being a good competitor. I've always just used competition as a way to validate my skills. To say, okay, like, where am I at? Like, what do I need to sharpen? What do I need to, tune in on, focus on, whatever. So I would consider myself to be a good shooter, but I'm not a very good competitor yet. And so that's what I have to learn how to do is be a good competitor. And Philip, the co-founder at Modern Day Sniper, he's an extremely avid competitor. And so that's where he cut his teeth. And so this book, With Winning in Mind, written by this guy Lanny Basham, who won several gold medals in the late 70s. He speaks about the 3 parts, right? So the 3 parts is the subconscious, right? We have the conscious mind, and then we have a self-image.
Right.
So the conscious mind is basically what triggers the subconscious to go to work. The conscious mind interprets conditions. It identifies, wind speeds. It identifies, where you're at in the pattern. On the shooting side, it identifies wind and all those things. And then what is the thought process is that the conscious mind then fires off the subconscious. And basically it's the trip. It says, okay, go to work. Right? Because we can only focus on one thing. Like, I can only think about that this is a Godox widget. Like, while I'm thinking about that, there's nothing else going on in my conscious mind because it just can't focus on anything else. But the subconscious mind can execute, millions and millions and millions of things at once. And then the other part of that, the third part of that, is a really interesting component called the self-image, which is how we visualize and view ourselves from the inside. Right? Like, as an example, if we show up to the firing line for a stage and you're thinking to yourself, I hope this bullet hits the target, your self-image is misaligned with what your goal is. Your goal is to put a bullet in the center of that target. So you have to believe truly that it is like me to hit this shot. It is like me to hit every shot that I take, because that needs to be programmed into your mind in order for you to truly believe that it's going to happen. So like teaching a kid how to play ball or play catch or go to bat. If you look at the kid and you say, whatever you do, don't strike out, what's probably going to happen?
Right.
He's probably going to strike out because that's number one, it's the last thing that he heard. And number two, now the self-image is terrified that if I don't do this, then something bad's going to happen, right? And so that's where the self-image comes in. which is, and what Lanny's thought process is that it's an equal spacing. Like we have to have equal distribution of these energies, right, in order for everything to come into that quote unquote flow state.
Sure.
Which is obviously a really cool place to be. We've all experienced that before, but the goal is to just be able to drop into that instantly.
Yep.
And do it on demand.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
like for you, when you're dealing with, like as I learn how to be a competitor, I'm asking people like, what are the tools that you use to drop into that moment, like when you need to?
I mean, I get Tourette's sometimes. Like you can use physical things to be like, no, like I found you kind of need to train. Like when you're training, you learn all this information about physical stuff, mental stuff. Like, okay, this is where I want to be. And I really like to try to train like I compete. So if you want to compete, very focused and very serious, very visualized, train like that, obviously. Because once you go to a competition, it's already different. So let's try to go back to that scientific thing of, if it's a scientific study, let's change as minimal as possible. That's the best outcome for success. So try to keep it as much the same as you can. And to me, that means take competition very lightly. Obviously, it is very serious to me, but there's no point in taking it so seriously that you're now detrimental. You're not doing it like you're training, right? So I'm always messing around. I am taking it seriously. It just doesn't say I try to do it lightheartedly. And then there's the more broad of like, hey, I'm at a competition today. What do I do? And then there's the more like in the moment of like, okay, now I'm going up. This is my, I don't know what you guys call it, a set, or like for me, this is my run. So for you guys, this is my stage. So I'm actually like, I'm ready. I'm going to the stage. To me, those are two different things, right? I like to stay, I really don't want to think about it too much in the overall scheme. I kind of do the less is more thing. For me, if you don't think about it, if you don't even think about an outcome, then you don't even have to realize, oh, I hope I miss, or I hope I hit it, and you don't even have to worry about that. So when you're there, turn it off. It's off. I try to be as off as possible when I get into, for me, it's the plane, or when I get out of the plane, I like to be completely off.
Got it. So is there an initiating action that you take, like in the plane? What's your routine? What is...
Not really, I guess, my routine. Obviously, you get in, there's just like the safety checks, but that's totally normal. That's every time. That's a fundamental, and that's subconscious. I don't really even have to check that. I try not to, I guess the biggest tics I have is when I actually start to think about something, I consciously tell myself to stop.
Got it.
Like if I'm like, oh, I should check the wind because, okay, well, sometimes, yeah, do check the wind, but I'm on the third pass, so I don't need to check the wind on the second pass. I need to check the wind when I'm in the door, because that's the only time it's really going to matter. Only time it matters more is when I'm actually swooping. So I try to use my own self as that barometer to be like, oh, you're starting to think about this. Stop.
Interesting.
Okay. And that's you don't see a lot of people doing that, or you at least don't hear a lot of people talking about that. Because you see, visualization is huge. It probably has been huge a lot, but you hear about it a lot these days.
Yeah.
And the concern with visualization to me is that what if it's slightly different? And at a high level, it makes a difference. In the grand scheme, if somebody doesn't know what they're looking at, they'd be like, oh yeah, well, you were great. That was fine. And I go, well, that was 0.2 seconds behind the leader. So that was actually 18th place. That's a big deal.
That's the measure right there. Like that's the 0.2 of a second.
Well, that's just a great example. Or like that was, I touched, 5 meters before the gate. And so that dropped me down to 5th or something. I don't know, because if I would have done this, and you also got to be careful with that. Don't play the coulda, woulda, shoulda game. Yep. Give yourself a hard enough, or not a hard time, but give yourself the criticism you need to learn, but not so much criticism that you're
don't push it beyond that.
Exactly. And so I usually like to do things that are actually physical, that like little tics. So like, for example, if I have a bad run, which is really easy to like give advice when you're doing well, right? But when you're doing poorly, it's really, really, I'm my own worst enemy, right? I just absolutely can hate myself.
I think that's pretty much
everybody.
We all
right?
are our own worst enemies.
But it's hard to like let it go. especially on a meet where it's important, or you did good the last meet and now you just blew a round. Maybe you didn't even blow the meet. Maybe you can totally come back. Doesn't matter. It's still really hard. I like to have physical things that I go, okay, I can give myself a hard time. I learned this from another swooper. I didn't actually come up with this. Is that, so where you land and where you pack is always usually a different spot. There's
Yep.
you always have to walk. So I go, as soon as I set my gear down, I need to be done. Whatever's going, I can hate myself as much as I want. You can do whatever. Turn it off and get over it. Once you take your gear off, once you're in the hangar, and actually more realistically, as soon as I take my gear off, that's when it's like, you need to stop.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great thing, man. That's a great piece of advice.
And you can choose it for you. It could be, you know, whatever somewhere always has. So like, for you guys, it'd be like, what does every range have? Or what does something, okay, maybe as soon as I pick up my last piece of empty brass, you need to get over this.
Yeah, so that's a great thing.
You know, insert thing. It's a physical thing that keeps you in check.
Yep. So for us, it would be like, you know, you would, you know, as soon as the time's up, you know, you make a complete safe rifle, right? Take your mag out, pull your bolt back, mag out. And then usually somebody's there to pick up your brass for you to kind of keep the flow going. Everybody kind of takes turns doing that. But then, like, my routine is as soon as I'm done with that, my brain is kind of scrambled eggs in that moment. Mm-hmm. So I do a post-fire check, which is I return my scope to 0, my elevation turret, drive to 0, make sure everything's set, make sure the rifle's safe, and then I'll take everything. By that time, somebody's handed me my brass.
Yep.
And then I take my rifle over to the safe area. Mm-hmm. And as soon as I'm at the safe area, the next thing that I do is I store my empty brass in my bag. I reload that magazine. And usually by that time, I've had enough time to kind of like mellow out and kind of, you know, unscramble my brains, so to speak. And then what I'll usually do is I'll jot notes down from the stage because it's fresh in my mind. Do you take notes at all when you do that?
Not really. It's a very, no, one, I'm not great at writing. I mean, I can physically write and great at spelling, but pretty bad handwriting. So to me, writing is just a detriment.
Yeah.
Taking note-taking or like log books, I absolutely hate that.
Sure.
So no, I'm not really a note taker. You don't see a lot of that. It's also not quite as mathematical as you guys are, like in the sense of like it's less numbers oriented.
Yes.
Like it's all the same. So like, oh, the density altitude is this and that affects that.
Perfect.
Or the wind, the quartering wind, or it's all the same thing because it is just, we're flying through the air. We are the bullet. We're a human-sized bullet going a lot slower, but we're still going pretty, you know.
Yep.
And so it's all the same principles apply, but it's less. I can't go, oh, I'm going to hold this because I'm up there going like all I can do is be like, well, I'm going to turn a little lower or a little higher. But as soon as you start your turn,
you know,
you're not looking at anything anyway. So maybe the whole dynamics can change anyways. Right. And that's a whole, like, that's a Swoop specific thing. I could talk for days about that.
Sure.
But it's less mathematical. So I think some of that, that's why it doesn't lend to note taking as well, because it's just not quite the same.
Well, for us, going back to that, hey, you're done, right?
Yep.
It could be, once you complete that, once you complete your true post-fire check,
for sure,
and you stand up and go back to your glass, like, yeah, you should be done. That's a great thing. I'm gonna probably implement that.
You do need to you need to give yourself time. It can't be immediate because you can't just expect to give.
You got to feel those feelings, right?
For sure.
You absolutely have to.
And this is a total separate. Well, not even separate, but this is a. Have you ever heard of bilateral stimulation?
No.
So it's left, right, and alternate like that. It's actually, there's a type of modality for like trauma therapy called EMDR. That's actually where I learned this from. But so like walking is a great example of running because it's left, right. So you notice how when you're hiking or walking, like your thoughts are always different than if you're just sitting there?
Totally. Absolutely.
Bilateral stimulation.
Got it.
So a lot of times walking, and that's why for me, walking back to the hangar, I'm going through different things in my head where if you're just stationary, it might not. So there's no one thing. I can't recommend or say exactly what to do for somebody because everybody's different. Do something, but you also need a physical check. I mean, you need, like, imagine a coach being like, hey, kid, get your head out of your ass. Like, you got a game to play.
Yep.
Sorry, you fucked up. Figure it out. It's the same thing, right? But sometimes you need that physical thing because it's really easy just to sit down and be like, I suck.
Right.
and just sit there until like, oh, your next stage, like, oh shit, now I got to do my thing.
And you're behind the power curve.
Right. Where if you would have just been like, all right, really hate myself right now, but the hanger's there. Okay, here we go. You know?
Let's get back on the airplane.
Exactly.
Yep.
And that's a huge thing. And on a little side note, I definitely recommend trying to be the competitor you want to compete against, which is easy to say when you're doing well. It's hard to say when it's hard to do when you're doing poorly.
That's a great point.
But like, you know, I had one season I started well, halfway through the season and just went to shit. The rest of the year was pretty bad actually. But that first meet where it went really poorly, I was not very fun to be around. You know, I wasn't mean, but I was like, man, you really need to be a better competitor, because that's not fun for me if somebody else is like that. Sure. And I saw there was the first year you go into the open class, it's a huge shock, because you go from being like the best amateur to being the worst open. And I saw a beginner kid, it was his first year open. He's good, but you know, not as good as we are, because it's his first year doing it. You can't expect to be. And he had kind of a poor run, and he was kind of being hard on himself, and his mom was there, and he's like, it doesn't matter, the meet's over. Just being kind of shitty, not mean, but I'm like, hey man, I get it, been there right now actually. I just blew my meet, but you wouldn't know because I'm over here giving you advice. I'm not even that I'm better, that's not even what I'm saying, but it's like, be the person you want to be, because somebody's going to look up to you, and not even necessarily in that either, but it just really makes it better. And to me, that's also another good challenge, to be like, well, get your head out of your ass. Like, the more I'm thinking about this challenge of, oh, I better be over this by the time I put my gear down, well, now I'm not thinking about my fuck up.
Yeah, you got a good point there.
You know?
No, that's good. I like that.
And so, or then even like, and that can be even on a smaller level or a more acute level while you're actually competing. Like there'll be times in canopy piloting, you're all landing roughly at the same time. You're in the sky together. And so the person in front of you can only go so fast or so slow before you catch up to them. But you also can't go too tight or land out of order, because then that just messes everything up. So there'll be times where I'm like tight behind somebody because I'm either messed up and I went fast or they went slow. Doesn't matter. I need to slow down. But it's challenging because I need to fly in a way that's not normal for me, because I'm not normally flying holding for somebody. Mm-hmm. And that's usually when I do. Usually those runs are pretty good, actually. Or it's the same time. Like I had a friend. He was actually a recon sniper. We both made the U.S. team together, and he had Curtis Taylor.
Curtis Taylor.
I don't know.
All right, man. Curtis Taylor, shout out.
There you go. If you're watching, man. Team TBI, baby. But he had like a pretty good meet at nationals, and I didn't know this, but he was like sick as a dog the whole time. And I don't know if this was actually the case for him or not, but I know sometimes like when you're not feeling well, or you're not thinking about what you're doing, you're just thinking about like, man,
that don't feel good.
Sucks.
Yeah.
I just want to get this over with.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's what you need. You need that physical thing to turn your brain off. I really like turning my brain off.
All right, man, that's a good perspective. And basically what you're doing at that point is just relying on your training to take control and do the thing.
Yep.
And that's
obviously at a high level. In the beginning level, don't turn your brain off. This is all once you've gotten the fundamentals.
Of course,
so it's all
yeah.
subconscious.
Absolutely.
You know, at a certain level, some advice doesn't work. This, you know, it doesn't cross over yet. You know, like you couldn't take advice from somebody who's at a certain level because it just doesn't apply quite there. So you always just need to be somewhat introspective on where you are and if it applies to you.
Absolutely.
Don't be afraid to listen to it, but it might not.
For sure. It very well could not, yeah. Well, we see it too, like different levels of awareness. And I'm sure it's the same thing in canopy piloting. And I mean, it was as I started to downsize in my canopies and started to notice that, hey, you know, things start happening faster. Mm-hmm. Things are more sensitive. And in the shooting world, your visual process will, so as an example, right? So when I look through my rifle scope and I line my sights up on my target and I press the trigger, if my body position is correct and the rifle's connected to me properly, and I've got, you know, a competition rifle, which means it's heavier, it's got a muzzle brake on it to keep the muzzle down, because I need to see exactly what that bullet just did on the target.
Yep.
I need to be able to read what it did on the plate, so that way if I need to add wind or take wind off, the way we say it's not a hit. If it's not center, it's still a fucking miss. Yeah. Because we want the student in that mindset to always correct for center if you can. Now, when you're first learning this, your students can't see, they might be able to recover from recoil quick enough, but they're not primed. Their brain isn't primed to pick out what's important.
Yeah.
The brain's seeing the information, right? It's coming into the eye, it gets processed through the brain and into the nervous system, but we don't know what's important yet. And that's at that higher level of competing, you're learning what's important and you're priming your brain for what's important.
You guys just heard the term cone of awareness?
We have a guy that does he does a class for us called the Psychology of Observation, and it might be the same thing. He and I were in the Marine Corps together, and he ran the Marine Corps' program. It's called Combat Hunter, and what it was to train reconnaissance assets, snipers, reconnaissance Marines, forward observers, things like that, on human mannerisms. What are people what's their body language telling them, learning how to interpret tracks. Not a full-blown tracking course, but more along the lines of instilling a little bit of tradecraft in people, and getting people to start looking at body language, nonverbal cues, things like that. So maybe in the same level.
He could probably explain it way better.
Go for it. What do you got?
It's essentially, imagine there's I'm going to try an analogy here for shooting. You guys are way better at this than I am. But imagine you have like your adjustable scope. So you have a target.
Yep.
And the first thing is like, oh, it's way out there. I'm just going to crank that up so I see nothing but the target.
Yep.
Great. You see the target. But you don't see anything else.
Correct.
So initially when you're learning, that's your cone. You just see this one thing. And the better you get, the more you can kind of zoom out. And as you zoom out, that cone gets bigger. So now you can see, oh, there's that little bush moving. Or there's little this. Or now you're farther back and you can see your mirage. And I'm really reaching to, hopefully I'm getting all the...
No, you're saying all the right things,
stuff, right?
You're saying all the right things.
And as you get more competent, confident, and current, I feel currency is a huge thing. I feel my cone of awareness get really small when I'm not current. When I'm current, I'll be doing my turn and I can see, I'll still be doing the thing coming out over 100 miles an hour, and I'll be looking at the water, oh, the water just shifted or this or that, all while I'm doing that same thing. But initially, that first one of the year, even sometimes if I haven't jumped for a couple weeks, that first jump, I'm like, man, it feels fast. I feel like my eyes are getting pulled back. I can't see it all. I feel like I'm blind.
Yeah.
I'm not, but there's that cone of awareness gets narrower as you are uncurrent or incompetent, I guess, or that's not a dig. That maybe not the best term. Yeah, rust for sure. So that cone of awareness is huge. And I try to gleam as much as you can. That's not just the target. That's not just that one thing. And
that's so freaking excellent. That's an excellent analogy, because that's really the truth. When you're rusty, I went to a match last weekend and I hadn't shot a rifle match in several months, and I handicap myself because I'm still in this. I'm not in that competitor's mindset yet. And I'm like, well, I'm going to go film this, and I'm going to try to capture this, and I'm going to try to, do all of these extra things. And it's just like, you're kind of an arrogant ass because you're rusty. You're not ready for that yet. When that cone of focus widens back out, right? When I'm able to have that bandwidth to process more information, then let's start adding the camera back in. Let's start adding the other things. But coming into this cold and rusty, it just wasn't a smart idea. And I got what I got. So, and it was just a level of focus and concentration that wasn't where it needed to be, or where it needed to be. And so, and I was trying to shoot with a suppressor, and a suppressor has a bigger recoil impulse than a muzzle brake, so you have more sight picture movement.
Yep.
And I elected to shoot a heavier bullet, which inherently has more recoil. So you start stacking all of these layers on top of layers and being rusty at the same time. It's just like, yeah, man, you need to train more.
Back to that, like,
Back to
keep
the
it like
drawing
science,
board.
man. It
Yeah.
really, you want to try to keep it as much as you can. And especially the better you get, the higher you get in competition, the more that makes a difference. In the beginning, like if you're first learning how to do this, if you could just be the best at doing the fundamentals, or I guess in theory, if we're all just the best at fundamentals, we'll be the best, but it doesn't really work that way. If you just focus on the fundamentals and you're good at it, okay, maybe I change weights. Maybe I'm shooting a suppressor, not a muzzle brake. There's more of this, but focus on the fundamentals. It's the margins aren't that tight. You'll probably be top of your class.
Mm-hmm.
At the highest level, it doesn't work that way.
Nope, it does not.
And so, once again, it goes back to like, where are you and what are the consequences of what you're doing?
Correct.
Because like for us, is it death? No. Or is it just not a good meet? Or is it blowing a very important meet? There's all these things. And then what meet is it? Maybe it's a meet where you're like, well, this is kind of like competition. You can't train competition. Like competition is only what it is. Like you can't do something and get exactly what, there's certain things that there's nothing you can't simulate it. It just is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Competition is one of those. So you have to be willing enough to have do enough competitions where you're like, well, I had a bad meet. That's just the way it goes. Maybe I was the best there and somebody just got lucky. Or somebody had a great day and I didn't have a great day. Or maybe I had a bad season. It's committing. You can't expect to do it in one season. Correct. If you are, great. Maybe next season won't be that way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So there's kind of a lot of that too. You have to be...
When did you actually start competing?
I started competing in 2020.
2020.
So I knew I wanted to do it, but where we were, there wasn't a lot of information on leagues and where to go, and I just wasn't certain on it. So I was like, I should be really good. I only really want to do it if I'm super egotistical, but I'm like, I only want to do it if I'm like good. I'm not expecting to win, but I don't want to go there and make an ass of myself. I want to be good.
Of course.
And so what I did unknowingly is train really hard and try to get really good, and that put me right at the top of the intermediate class. So my first season, I won the whole year. I did really well actually, but it was super stressful and not what I was expecting for my first season. So then when you crush it your first year, right, and then you go to pro, you're like, oh, maybe I'm the next. Because there's always a couple people that are like, that person obviously does the work. Like, it's not taken away that they're not hard workers, but some people are just naturally probably going to be the best at something, right? And everybody else is not. Mm-hmm. So I was like, oh, I'm probably going to be the next like Kurt or the next whatever, next guy who's really good. Not the case. I just was good that year. Good at intermediate and not good in pro. Doesn't change. It changes.
We've probably talked about this, but a parallel to that, Philip, business partner, he shot the first year he went to nationals in 2018. Not only did he win the finale match, but he shot a perfect score on the second day.
Heard the legend of Phil.
And so like that kind of screwed him up in the sense of like, now I've got this, it's attainable.
I could do it. I did it.
Right. And then anything else below that then becomes unacceptable.
Sure.
And then that can turn toxic really fast. And so he said that was a really difficult thing for him to kind of overcome in the sense of like.
I mean, that is progression. That is how that works. Like so we're setting the bar for people that are learning how to do it in 5 years. Because in 5 years, those people that are just learning are going to be at this level as a beginner, pro or open or whatever your guys call it, classes.
The competition is so deep now that sometimes the first 7 slots are separated by 2 points.
Yep.
3 points.
Absolutely.
So, and then we have like tiebreaker stages that go for speed as well as accuracy. So, I mean, if you miss a shot, you're pretty much out at that point in time. It's all speed. So the competition is getting really fierce. And I would imagine it's kind of the same thing in the skydiving world. Like the gear is all pretty, like nobody's got the secret sauce up the back sleeve type thing.
I might say they do, but there has been some new stuff come out in the last couple of years, but more and more people are starting to get on them. And so it's not so you are at a complete advantage if you're on a supine. If you know these, if you're in the supine or the Mutant is a brand, it's an absolute advantage. But it's kind of an absolute advantage as if all of a sudden you go to an incredibly crisp light trigger. Sure, it's better if you know how to do it.
Right, if you know how to do it.
So not everything is just a pure advantage that'll make you win. So,
meaning you have to train for it. Like, so in our world, the rifles are pretty much, they're pretty much online, right, with one another. In the world of custom rifles being built, there's not very much difference in equipment. Now, people's hand loads, on the other hand, depends on their process. Most people are shooting cartridges these days that are really easy to load for, and they're not very temperamental. So then it boils down to it's the individual, right? So we teach in our intro classes, our level 1 classes. We have the circle of components: the rifle, the optic, and the ammo. Those 3 things have to be functioning properly in harmony with one another.
Yep.
But then the other aspect is the shooter. And so you have, you could have a shooter that has a lot of resources to buy the best equipment possible. So, and I've seen that. I can't even tell you how many times I've seen that, where it's just like, hey, I just bought what the internet said was the best.
Yep.
Right. Well, now that shooter he's got a pile of really expensive metal and glass until he learns how to use it. So now it's like, now the shooter is in the mix, and it's like that top 5%, in that top 5%, that's where the mental game really starts to show up and say, okay, this is, and every time I've ever shot and won matches or done well at matches, I've always just been not trying, not even caring.
Absolutely. That's my approach. Everybody's a little bit different.
For sure.
Skydiving is definitely, I would say, even less like that, or maybe more like that. Our gear is pretty much all the same, and if you're a prototype jumper, sometimes, hey, maybe there's a prototype out there that is better, but who's to say how much better it is, unless it's like an absolutely ground-changing, innovative thing. 10% might be a stretch. Sure. Probably more like 5%, which is significant, but it is all very personal.
Yeah, for sure. Same thing with, some people, everybody, Chevy, Ford, Dodge, right? Optics, chassis, or stocks that you would call stocks, rifle actions, barrel manufacturers, all of it, right? Everybody's got good components these days, sure. Much like in the skydiving world. So, what's next for you, and what are your goals for the coming season?
Boy, that's a tricky one. Goals are always tough. I made this goal. Somebody asked me, it was like at a New Year's. They're like, what was your resolution? I answered it totally not.
Of course, brash, I'm sure.
Yeah. I wasn't brash. I was like, no, I'm like, I answered it not as a, they're like, well, that's not a resolution. I'm like, okay, fair enough. I was like, I want, and this is super broad and probably not going to happen, I want to be happy with every outcome of every meet. That's hard. That's harder than if I said I want to win every meet. That might be.
That's some Zen shit right there.
To be honest, but and then I think more than that, this one's actually might be more attainable and actually would go towards that. I want to be at each meet only. I don't want to be thinking about the last meet. So like when I was at the World Cup, I got 4th in the world. It was my first world meet. I was like, man, that's pretty cool. 4th is weird. You don't get any medals. You don't really get any recognition, but you're like up there. So it's kind of a weird spot. Whatever. Pretty happy about it. Then I would go to Dubai, my first international meet, going somewhere else, jumping in Dubai, jumping in the Palm. It was a wild thing. And I blew my first round, and I was really dogging on myself, being like, you're 4th in the world. Like, this just goes to show that, it was luck or it was whatever. You're actually not good.
Turn it off.
Turn that off. And I was able to turn that off, and I got a couple medals. I beat some people who I really look up to, are really good, by pretty small margins. All the margins are pretty small. And I think I beat Cornelia by 0.4 points. So tight. But I got some medals, got some prize money. So that was good. But there's ups and downs. So, and that whole time I was able to kind of pull myself out of it and not think about it. But the whole time I was like, man, you're 4th. You should be better than this. or now they're, now these people are thinking that. They probably aren't. Doesn't matter. That's all internal stuff. So I want to be better at being at just one meet.
Good, man. That's a hell of a.
And also win some medals.
Well, yeah, you win some medals, but man, that's a good place to be, right? That's one of the things is trying not to be. You can't be focused on the outcome. You have to be focused and in love with the process. And so I've never actually like purposefully and intentionally trained to go shoot, and so I'm really stoked about getting that opportunity to do that and seeing truly where I'm gonna stack up.
I would say, yeah, I don't know. That's kind of a tricky one. I'd say, yeah, do some training. Don't take it too seriously, and try. I would say this first season, just throw it away. This first season competition is training.
Yeah.
That would be my biggest thing, because if you really want to do it, unless you just want to do it 1 year, which that's fine if you do, but if you really want to be like, I had the goal, I'm like, I want to win a world championship because that'll mean I'm the best swooper. I've learned now it doesn't. It just means you were that day.
That's a great point, man.
And so to me, the best swooper is the guy who's done it, who's been good for a long time and has won world championships.
There you go.
That's to me the best. And obviously that's kind of a broad thing, but you kind of get the point. Sure. And that guy probably was like, yeah, 2010 sucked. A single thing.
Yeah.
That blew. But then 2015, I killed it. I didn't lose a single meet because I knew how to do this, because I'd taken the time to figure out what type of competition works for me. Maybe you're the focus, visualize, do the thing. Maybe you're just the fuck around guy who likes to joke around, but focused, but I will not give a straight answer if I don't have to. I was at the World Cup and they had actual videos and live streams and announcers. It was pretty cool. So you had your biography, and I didn't put they're like, how many jumps do you have? I didn't write that down. I was just like, I like the long wicks in the woods and smell of chainsaws and two-stroke or whatever.
You know what?
And
no,
then
fuck you.
They were like, hey, what? He called down. He's like, oh, you're up this round. What's, how many jumps do you have? And I'm like, huh? It's 4. So
No, you did your interview with Parachute Magazine.
I did. You know how many tries it took me to fill.
Are you for real?
Yeah, because I filled those out online, or I typed those. Okay. So that was hard to not just fuck off.
Well, you're a very humble man, dude. You're a very humble dude, and you've always been this way. Well, ever since I've known you, anyways. And sometimes it's difficult to step into your own, right? And there's a level of healthy. There's a polar opposite to everything, right? So there's the thing, and then there's the negative side of it, and then there's the positive side of it, and it's a 180-degree opposing force. So you can have arrogance, there's humility, and then on the other end of the spectrum is arrogance, but there is something in the middle that is a confidence in your own abilities, and doing it with a commanding presence, but at the same time, with humility, which is a very difficult balance to strike.
Hard. Super hard.
Yeah,
sure.
And you have to know in your heart that you're capable of doing this, and you have to believe that with every bit of your heart. One of the things that Basham attributes to his win at the Olympics is, he's like, I'd seen myself win the Olympics 100,000 times.
Sure.
He had gone over and over and over. So there was only one option, right? And that was to perform at his best level. Sure. And so I'm excited about this, because every time I do these things, I learn more and more about myself.
You're gonna learn so much for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. And we put ourselves in front of our students all the time. Every class. That was one of the things that both Philip and myself took from our days as being military snipers, is that our instructor staff never shot in front of us. They never shot in front of us.
Yeah.
They do, maybe a demonstration here or there, but they never shot in front of us. And so now every class we do an evaluation, and the instructor shoots the evaluation in front of the students, to set the bar and set the standard for that day.
For sure, man.
So that way it's like, hey man, if it's blowing, 20 plus miles an hour out here, and the best score that an instructor can put together is, a 90% or an 85%, whatever it ends up being, you can't expect your students to do better than that.
Just basic. That's just basic leadership.
Basic leadership,
like,
right? So you have to, put yourself out there, and that's one of the really important things. I had somebody send me a message, and they were just like, look, there's only a couple of companies out there that I look to, and that's, you guys and a couple other companies that are actually putting yourselves out in front of your peers, saying, hey, I'm here to learn. I might not be the best, but I'm here to learn, and not be afraid of doing that, because there's a lot of ego that surrounds our world, as everybody's world. I mean, there's no difference. And I love people say, oh, the shooting sports are so egotistical, and it's just like, man, it's all the same, man.
Well, I have a lot of friends who have been or are competitive shooters that also skydive. There's a lot of, actually, it's a surprising amount of veterans there as well.
Oh, for sure.
And so I think there's a lot of crossover there. People are all the same.
Yep, absolutely. So it's a journey. It's a journey. It's an epic adventure, and I'm super pumped for it, and I'm excited to just put that focus and that energy there, because it's been a while since I've had some goals. I haven't had very many goals lately. The goal has just been surviving lately.
Dude, tell you what, that's honestly my biggest advice. People ask me like, oh, how do you like newer jumpers, and I still consider myself a newer jumper. I'm not, but I just consider myself the young kid there, so it's always weird to get people ask advice, but somebody always looks up to somebody. You're always everybody, and so people are like, oh, what's your advice to like have fun, or what's your advice to a newer jumper, which is just a really broad question. Like, I don't know, really learn how to fucking land a parachute, whatever. But to me, the real advice is like, have a goal, choose a goal that's like relatively attainable. Doesn't need to be like crazy. Also doesn't need to be stupid.
Right.
And then also have fun doing it. Right. Especially like skydiving, swooping, there's no money in it.
That's, it's funny that you bring that up, because there's no money in the shooting sports either.
Yeah. Costs a lot, doesn't make any.
Exactly. So for everybody here, the audience, what does it cost to go compete at a swoop meet?
So at the World Cup, it was a $1,400 entry fee, and that got me 9 jumps. That buys your jumps.
Okay.
And that's it. Maybe sometimes you'll get like a jersey or whatnot, just like from there.
Okay.
And then obviously airfare to get there, and then gear. So I have different years. Last year I was only on one canopy. I was only on one size two canopies. So one per discipline, and one was using for 2. And then 2 different containers. So each one of these peregrines, they're about $4,700. I get deals through Performance Designs as one of their athletes. So it's a little bit different for me, but that wing is $4,700 per wing, and at about 500 jumps per wing before it's unairworthy. It's a 100 jump. It's about 100 jumps per set of lines. So the lines, those are $100 to $150 to get them replaced. You also have to, there's downtime because you have to send it to the manufacturer if you're not a rigger. Each container I have for a different discipline. So I have a supine harness for speed and distance, and then I have a conventional harness for accuracy. Those are with the reserve. My mutant was $3,500, $4,000, and I got a pretty good deal on it. So each one of these things you're looking $6,000 per container. This current season I'll be going with 3 peregrines, so I have each discipline. I'll have a different size, and each one of those would be $4,600.
And you're going through a canopy, what, every season?
Well, the more you have, the less one on each.
Yeah, you're kind of alternating them.
Basically every other season.
Every other season.
Yeah.
So you're $4,700 every other season.
For sure.
Yeah.
And then jump, obviously, like once you're there to train, so like you're at the drop zone a week leading up, because to me, if you're going to spend the money to go, don't pinch pennies and like, well, I'm going to save, $1,000 extra bucks and not jump early. So you're just wasting the money to be there if you're not gonna perform as best as you have the opportunity to.
Right.
Why are you going?
Sure.
You know, people are like, oh, I'm like, and I get if you have work, or I get it. Like, I do understand. But part of me is like, well, if you're going to do this, take the time to do it right and give yourself the best opportunity, because it's going to be hard enough just to do it right with all the things going right.
Sure.
So I'm there for a week, probably 20 to 50 jumps would be a lot in a week. So 20 to 30 jumps leading up, not even the competition. So each competition, a cheap one, you're looking at, you know, $2,000 to $3,000 per competition. And that's not including any sort of breakdown for gear and whatnot.
Yeah, so that's about right. I mean, if you're, you know, for us, so like to go travel, right? Obviously, we actually just had the first year of international competition.
Nice.
So that's pretty badass. But national competition, right? It's your airfare. Obviously, they're 2-day events. Entry fees are about $300 for the match. And you're loading probably, 250 rounds of ammo.
Yep.
So how much ever that costs, you know, and our barrels will last, your flight, your travel, your staying places. A lot of people camp at the venues and stuff like that.
I'm a big camper myself.
And you're a hanger bum.
I'm a
hanger bum.
I don't really usually sleep in the hangar, to be fair, but yes, no, I definitely, I like sleeping. People are always like, oh man, you can sleep in a tent, you just stay in my house. And I'm like, yeah, then I gotta get a car, and then I gotta like wait up until you go to sleep. Unless it's like hot and like humid Florida type stuff, sleeping outside is great. Like I'm going down to Arizona in January, and it's usually cold down there. People are like legitimately concerned because I'll just like coyote camp, so I'll have a tarp on a line. Yeah. And it's like a $600 sleeping bag. Yeah. I'm like, oh, you're cold. Do you want to sleep with them? I'm like, no, I'm fine. This is great. I love this. This is like a really nice sleeping bag, actually. So I'm good.
And I'm going to sleep really well tonight.
I'm going to sleep so good. Yeah. Exactly. So but yes, regardless.
Yeah. So you have, I mean, people are spending, $2,000 or $3,000.
I mean, people definitely spend more than I do because they'll usually rent cars and they'll do this. I don't mind. Well, to me, that's not even roughing. I grew up in the woods and whatnot where, you could actually rough it. Or sleeping in a tent with like a phone charger and a coffee maker and like a little Bialetti and like a jet boil. That's not roughing it. But to some people, that's really rough. So, if you rent a car and you a hotel and places to stay and drinks and stuff after, at night, that
adds up.
That definitely adds up because there's obviously a social aspect of it too.
For sure, and there's a lot. So basically, at the end of the day, you're dedicated to doing it, right? It's a commitment. So, well, V, where can people find you and watch your journey? I know you're not super huge on social media.
Not super huge on social media.
You should probably get better at that a little bit.
I know I need to get better at that. It's a balance. That might be one for another topic of sponsorship and priorities and jobs and whatnot. But
yeah.
You can find me on Instagram, Kinda Shoeless V, or if you just look up my name, Prib. I'm on Facebook, but more just kind of socially there. And that's pretty much it. I haven't delved in any of the other platforms there. I was on TikTok for about that long, and
we talked about doing a TikTok account for Modern Day Sniper.
And I was like, oh no, God. I couldn't do it. So, I need to get better at it, but the sponsorships aren't quite there. To be honest, where it's like, well, the best sponsorship you can get is sometimes not worth. I'd rather just maybe have my tree business be successful.
I can feel that, brother.
Pay full price.
I can totally feel that.
I don't have to worry about it. But there's a balance there. So Instagram mainly is where you can find me. Instagram or Facebook. I will be at the World Championships in September. I will be in...
Where's Worlds at?
That's in Pretoria, South Africa.
That's right, yeah. That's
and then
awesome,
I will be in Rayford, North Carolina for the USPA Nationals to make the team again, because you have to make the team every year. That'll be end of August. I'll have a pretty busy month there. I'll probably be gone for about a month straight, which that'll be an expensive meet, needless to say.
Right.
And then there's the USCPA. That's just a US league. That starts in March, so I'll be going on Florida in March there. So.
Okay, man.
I'll try to get better at putting stuff online, but no
it's
guarantees
just,
there.
It's cool for people to watch on your path, it's going to be really cool to watch you too. So I'm looking forward to making some jumps with you
Let's go, dude.
and learning from you this
sure, man.
this spring and summer.
We'll have to trade off. We'll have to teach me how to sling some lead.
Yeah,
sure,
man. Well, we have the means.
You got the stuff, so I know a guy.
Yeah, and the range is actually like 15 minutes that way.
Sweet.
So it's
man.
perfect. Dude, this was a blast, man.
For sure. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Mike's worked. Mike's worked.
Yeah, the mic's worked. Sorry, Phil. All right. Oh, this is great.